Trying to take the derivative of cosine inverse of x, we can let y equal cosine inverse of x. And of course, this is an inverse function, so we can set it equal to some f inverse of x. First thing we can do is solve for x. So we get that x is equal to cosine of y, and now we can differentiate both sides of this equation with respect to x or with respect to y. First, I'll differentiate with respect to y. So we get that dx dy is equal to the derivative of cosine of y with respect to y. Of course, this is equal to negative sine of y. So we get that dx dy is equal to negative sine of y. But we don't want dx dy, we want dy dx. So we can reciprocate both sides of this equation, and we get that dy dx is equal to 1 over negative sine y. But what is sine of y? To figure out what sine of y is, we can construct a triangle based off of this equation here on top, or we can just use the trigonometric identity and get that sine of y is equal to the square root of 1 minus cosine squared y. But what is cosine y again? It's just x. So this is the same thing as 1 divided by square root of 1 minus x squared. So the derivative of cosine inverse of x is equal to negative 1 divided by square root of 1 minus x squared. So that's by differentiating with respect to y. We can also differentiate with respect to x. Doing so, we get dx over dx is equal to 1. Now differentiating with respect to x of cosine of y, we have to use implicit differentiation, as well as the chain rule. So we're going to get cosine y, derivative of cosine y is negative sine y, times the derivative of the inside of cosine, which is y, so the derivative of y with respect to x. And now we can solve for dy dx by dividing both sides by negative sine of y, and we get that dy dx is equal to 1 over negative sine y. And again, what is sine of y? Well, we can use this identity again, or you can construct a triangle based off of this equation, however you want to do it. So solving for sine of y, we get that sine of y is equal to the square root of 1 minus cosine squared of y. And again, cosine of y is equal to x, so this is the same thing as square root of 1 minus x squared. So we get that sine of y is equal to square root of 1 minus x squared, so we can plug that in, and we get that dy dx is equal to 1 divided by square root of 1 minus x squared, and of course we have the negative sign in front. So here's are two different ways to get the same answer. Two different ways of solving for the derivative of cosine inverse of x. Now, another way would be to use this rule here. So if we have some function of some inverse function of some input, we just get left off with the input. Using this fact, we can take the derivative of both sides with respect to x. So using the chain rule here, we'll take the derivative of the outside times the derivative of the inside, and of course the derivative on the right hand side is just 1. Dx equals to 1. And now we can solve for f inverse of x prime by dividing by f prime of f inverse of x. So we get that f inverse of x prime is equal to 1 divided by f prime of f inverse of x, and of course f inverse of x is just y, how we said over here, as well as over here. So using this formula, we can start off the problem again. So we know that y, we said let y equal to cosine inverse of x, which is the inverse function, and of course we can solve for x again. And we also know that f of x is equal to cosine of x, because f inverse of x is equal to cosine inverse of x. So the original is just the original. So we can say that f of y is equal to cosine of y, just by plugging in a y instead of an x. The reason why we want f of y instead of f of x is because the formula has f prime of y. So the next step would be to find f prime of y. So solving for f prime of y, we get negative sine y. And again, what is sine of y? Well, we figured that out over here using the identity. So we get that sine of y is the square root of 1 minus cosine squared y. But again, what is cosine of y? Well, it's x. So we can say that this is the same thing as 1 minus x squared. Therefore, cosine inverse of x, the derivative of cosine inverse of x, is equal to 1 over f of y prime. Remember, f of y prime is this. So the derivative is equal to negative 1 over square root of 1 minus x squared. So in total, here are 3 different ways of solving for the derivative of cosine inverse of x.